Let's move on to the story. Following Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's budget speech, the Public Service Accountability Monitor makes reflections in conjunction or in addition to promises made by President Cyril Ramaphosa in his State of the Nation address. It's meant to align the address with the budget speech and then makes recommendations on how goals can be achieved to build a government that works for all. Let's discuss this now with Public Service Accountability Monitor Program Head at Rhodes University. That's Zukiswa Kota. Zukiswa, thank you so much for the time. Good morning to you. Can we even make this budget work?
Good morning, Arabile, and thank you for this chance to have a conversation with you. I think that's a good question. I do think that, on the one hand, as many commentators, many social justice activists and economists have said, there are some fundamental issues with this budget in a similar light to other budgets. But by and large, there are aspects of it that can be made to work, particularly, I suppose we wait to hear if it will be passed. Parliament is yet to pass it. But in the event that it is passed, there certainly are elements of the budget that can be made to work.
Yeah, the first thing that we mentioned here, and again, we have to stress, as you just did there, that indeed we're waiting for this budget to actually pass. So if it does come to pass, then can we actually make it work? Because it will need the combined effort of the GNU. One of the first things you make note of here is local government spending and basic service delivery. If there's ever a poignant element that needs to come to the fore immediately, it is that. But that just means you have to spend more, not necessarily curtail spending. But is it being used efficiently? Your thoughts?
Yeah, the local government space is perhaps one of the most dire in as far as the implications of poor funding or underfunding or unspent funds, which is in fact another problem that we've noted in a policy brief that we put together related to the impact of underspending at the local government level. But certainly in terms of municipalities, it is evident that the model that currently relates to the fiscal framework or the model that relates to municipal funding isn't working, hasn't been working for many years. And the good news, which the minister tabled recently, is that there is going to be, well, by the sounds of it, a meaningful revision and a review of the fiscal framework and the funding model for local government, because certainly the way the budgets are structured and the way budgets are spent has not been working for many, many years in the local government space.
If there's one word that I see across this brief that you guys have put out, actually, that you hold a lot on is optimism. How do you place that optimism, considering where we have been with regards to growth, regards to spending, regards to corruption and the like as well, especially when growth is 0.6 and 0.7% the year before? It doesn't seem to be very optimistic.
Yeah, Arabile, I think it perhaps the element of optimism you find on the one hand, the brief and in the post-budget statement that we issued is not so much about the sense, that the budget is wonderful. It certainly is not. But it is more a sense about there are elements of it that I think are important to emphasize. One of which, as I say, is this local government element. However, we do say there is a need to, really overhaul, the accountability mechanisms or accountability ecosystem, not just at local government, in fact, but across the context, which is why we then also emphasize the question around, it's one thing to speak about the budget, as it were. It's one thing to speak about increased budgets in certain areas. It's one thing to speak about allocating meaningful budgets to health, education, or any other sphere. But it's another if funds continue to be wasted through the system. It's another if procurement systems are simply not working, are not on, up to par, are not progressive in the way they should be in terms of the developmental agenda of the country. And it's entirely another if the anti-corruption architecture that we are consistently talking about isn't working and isn't adequately resourced. So in fact, on the one hand, we'll continue to have these issues around poor growth and budgets that aren't pro-poor and aren't progressive, but at the same time continue to have funds that are wasted even when they are allocated. And this is not just at local government, of course, it's across the board.
Implementation of the national health insurance. An additional 20 billion rand added to health overall, the health budget. Is that progressive? Is that helpful? Is that creating the preparatory work that we need for it, especially when are now going to lack funding from the likes of PEPFAR?
I mean, yeah, I think to start on this cut on the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief, you know, PEPFAR as it's called, it was interesting to note in a briefing, I think it was a briefing soon after the budget was tabled, in which the DDG of the National Treasury indicated that at this point, and it's a phrase I think he used fairly lightly, but indicated that there isn't in the current fiscal framework an accounting for the impact of PEPFAR. Of course, it waits to be seen. You know, we'll soon see what might happen in the medium-term budget statement in October. There's likely to be a range of other changes, including, in fact, a kind of acknowledgement and an accommodation of the PEPFAR impact, which will be dire, has been dire already. But I think it is important to acknowledge this increase in health allocations. Health is, as you know, one of the fundamental areas of need and inequality in this country. What we are concerned about, however, is by that same token, the impact in terms of, and I think this has been emphasized again and again, the community health worker impact, the number of medical practitioners that whose posts are frozen, and a range of other issues that are impacting the health system. So again, this note of sort of acknowledging, yes, increases to the health budget, but on the other hand, the existing the existing infrastructural issues, existing staffing issues in the health sector. The last element, of course, is the NHI. That's something that's been topical for a very long time on many people's minds, is its rollout. There's been concerns about what it means for the majority. There's been concerns about, will it work? And so again, there are concerns about the momentum of the NHI and the planning phase. So there has been a degree of great work or good planning that we've seen, but it does seem as if that might be another area of concern in terms of whether or not the preparedness or the planning will meet the objectives of the NHI rollout.
Zukiswa, one thing you guys don't mention much of in this seems to be the most contentious of issues, which is value-added tax. Is that the best way to collect funds, you think? Is that the right way, I suppose, right now, considering the circumstances under which our country is?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, it's I think I won't attribute it necessarily to the work of many organizations, but certainly the noise and the advocacy that has come from groups like the Budget Justice Coalition, of which we are a member, and others around the impacts of an increase in value-added tax. We are entirely behind that call, the call to avoid making cuts, or rather avoid increasing VAT in ways and making cuts to the budget in ways that will have an impact, in particular on those that are most vulnerable, on households that are already struggling to meet basic needs. And so we are very much behind the calls that many others have made to say there are other ways in which to mobilize funds, in which to find money in the budget, and certainly increasing value-added tax, which again, as many have shown, and much research has gone into this by others as well within our coalitions, to say that is not the way. And so we too are very much in support of that call. And by and large, I think I think many would say even the current increase by 0.5 percentage point this year and 0.5 percentage point next year should be scrapped, should be rejected by Parliament. But I do think one encouraging thing is very much that there is a responsiveness, or a seeming responsiveness, to calls by commentators, by the public, by members, in this instance, perhaps of the GNU. It might be that we see a much more robust engagement in Parliament. It is Parliament's job to do this work. We don't feel that it should be the jostling within the GNU, in fact, where these decisions are made on behalf of the people. We feel very much it should be happening in Parliament. So a debate and a discussion about whether or not to reject a budget that includes an increase to VAT must happen in Parliament. And that's one of the calls we make, is very much for a Parliament that does take its job more seriously, a Parliament that uses its powers that are held in the Money Bills Amendment Act in as far as rejecting, passing or amending a budget.
Yeah. All right. Well, Zukiswa, a very interesting one. Of course, as we've been speaking about, it's going to be very important to first hear whether it's actually going to be approved. So there's still going to be a lot of question marks when it comes to this, but really appreciate your sense of where things could possibly go then as well. So Zukiswa Kota, the Public Service Accountability Monitor Program Head at Rhodes University.